The heartland is already dead, the $15 trillion lie that will end US food. The accountant slid the paper across the kitchen table and said the number out loud. 15 trillion. The farm, the feedlot, the elevator, the rail spur, everything here rides a $15 trillion promise built on a 174,000 square mile sponge that's almost empty. The pivots still spin, but the countdown isn't decades, it's crop cycles. Wells cough, pumps scream, yields wobble. Here's what almost no one will say. The secret isn't depletion, it's who profits as the water vanishes. Since the late 194s, we've pulled 410 cubic kilometers, 85% of Lake Erie, out of the Ogallala. So why build America's food on a timer you can hear at night? Abundance was a finance story. On paper, the story looked clean. Productivity up, technology wins, America feeds the world. In the fields, it sounded like diesel and electricity lifting ancient water to grow corn where rain can't carry the load. The Ogallala underlies 8 states, the unseen engine behind a large share of US crops and cattle feed. What we called abundance was mining. We weren't farming the weather. We were spending an account laid down thousands of years ago, an account that refills, in much of the southern high plains, in inches per year. The scale lands when you pull steel tape from a test well and your fingers come back cold. In western Kansas, average declines since the mid-20th century sit around 28.2 feet. In the Texas Panhandle, roughly 44 feet. Eastern New Mexico, about 19.1 feet. Those are averages, hotspots fall far deeper. Some wells that roared in the 198s blow air today. A pump that used to lift 60 feet now lifts 200. Every foot costs more power, more parts, more risk. Across core counties, withdrawals outpace recharge by wide margins. One wet spring doesn't refill fossil storage that in places would take millennia, more than 6,000 years, to naturally recover. Meanwhile, ledgers stayed bright. Land values climbed as if water were permanent. Banks wrote loans assuming irrigated yields. Crop insurance guaranteed revenue floors. The math behind that confidence depended on one thing: perpetual pumping. Center pivots, 6-figure rings of steel, became collateral as much as equipment. Refinancing was easiest when a well still hit gallons per minute targets. If flow dropped, the asset didn't just get thirstier, it got riskier. Finance shaped behavior in quiet ways. When margins tightened, the rational move on paper was to push water through high-dollar crops that maximized insured revenue. Insurance and price supports nudged corn and cotton into places rainfall alone wouldn't support. If drought hit or a well stumbled, indemnities softened the blow. Risk didn't disappear, it moved. Losses spread to taxpayers and creditors, gains flowed upstream. The feed mill still got grain, the lender still booked interest. The input dealer still moved seed and fertilizer. The aquifer paid. County maps shifted from pale yellow to blood red. Cones of depression expanded. Dry wells clustered along the edges of feedlot country and ethanol belts. Scientists flagged the trend. Farmers saw it in pressure gauges and end towers that no longer reached the last quarter. Declines weren't linear. They steepened when neighbors chased the same pocket. Competing straws didn't just share, they accelerated the drop. The official line pointed to efficiency, drop nozzles, variable rate pivots, better genetics. Each improvement squeezed more out per inch, but efficiency often led to more irrigated acres or more valuable, thirstier crops, not less pumping. The Jevons paradox wore boots. Technology bought time while expectations stayed the same. On ledgers, efficiency justified more debt and higher appraisals. In the ground, it slowed the fall but didn't stop it. Policy never put a hard backstop on the throttle. There's no federal cap on pumping the Ogallala. States drew patchworks, local boards, management districts, meters in some zones, self-reporting in others. In key states, groundwater tied to land deeds meant private rights over a reservoir that behaves like one slow, leaky bathtub across 8 borders. Local control met regional hydrology, and physics won. Incentives favored pumping now. Future cuts hurt future balance sheets. Present water strengthened current loans. The stakes aren't abstract. The Ogallala supports about 30% of U.S. irrigation water and underpins roughly a fifth of national wheat, corn, cotton, and cattle production. That predictability hit a timer. As depth increased and quality slipped in pockets, Energy costs climbed, nitrates rose in some wells, and maintenance headaches multiplied. Margins shrank, but contracts remained. Someone had to keep pivots turning until the numbers no longer penciled. Follow the money, and the abundance narrative makes sense. Rising yields secured bonds for rural infrastructure. County budgets leaned on valuations inflated by irrigated potential. Dealers thrived on upgrade cycles. Crop insurance premiums and indemnities became a dependable stream. Even as wells struggled, the financial superstructure kept signaling stability. The accounting trick was temporal. Today's returns borrowed from tomorrow's water. Warnings were clear if you listened. Since the late 194s, the High Plains Aquifer has lost about 410 cubic kilometers, roughly 85% of Lake Erie's volume. In many southern counties, usable lifespan measures in decades at current extraction rates, not centuries, and a warming climate shortens that runway by spiking crop water demand exactly when wells deliver less per hour. Nights that once let pumps catch up now keep plants transpiring. Heat domes convert manageable into not enough. Here's the part many avoided. Thresholds are cliffs, not ramps. Lower saturated thickness means pumps pull more air. A hot June adds 2 inches you didn't plan to move. Static levels slip. By August, bowls cavitate and bearings heat. Even after a wet winter, the baseline doesn't return to last year's mark. The system looks resilient right up until it is. We also never priced the water. Not its scarcity, not its value to towns, not its ecological role. We priced the energy to lift it and the gear to move it. We ensured the revenue on what it grew. We booked profits as if the account could float forever. When the tape read lower each January, spreadsheets adjusted, but families, payrolls, and plans moved first. That's the lie. Abundance wasn't free. It was financed against a depleting, ancient balance the books never depreciated. Families on borrowed water. Drive the High Plains in August, and you can spot pressure from the highway. Green arcs hold against a baked horizon. Beside them, the wind has already started moving soil. In Ulysses, Hereford, and Clovis, the day starts with a gauge reading. If the needle drops, peril shrinks. 15 people don't stay on when one well decides whether a plant runs 3 shifts or 1. A superintendent tracks enrollment like rainfall. When irrigated acres go fallow, kids vanish. One fall, the marching band fields 60. 2 years later, it's 30, and bus routes get shorter. At a kitchen table in western Kansas, a third-generation farmer runs a finger down a column and says sorghum like a confession. His grandfather broke sod. His dad set the first pivot in the 196s. He shut his off last spring when the pump started sucking air by noon. They tore up a corn contract and went dryland, sorghum, wheat, sunflowers, income halved. The bank reworked terms, but now the note rests on weather, not horsepower. He nods toward a field they once double-cropped and says it's straight. We are still here. It feels like we stepped back 30 years. Down the road, a feedlot that once drew steady from 3 wells learned heat turns water into logistics. On 100-degree days, a steer can drink 20 gallons, half in a tight window. When pressure slips, you triage troughs first, dust later. One July, Pen 3 slowed to a trickle. They trucked water from town to keep cattle out of heat stress. The margin shrank to hours. They upgraded lines, added storage, drilled again. The new hole came up short. Electricity bills climbed. Peace of mind didn't. None of this shows in a grocery aisle. It's there anyway. Feed costs rise when local corn wobbles. Cattle haul farther for finishing. Packers squeeze because they can. A mom in Omaha pays 50 cents more a pound and shrugs. Distance hides cause. Near the wells, it's a choice you can feel. Keep the crew or cut them. Keep the home place or sell a quarter to pay down debt. Ethanol plants built on cheap irrigated corn repeat the same ritual. When a county's irrigated acres shrink, trucks arrive from farther east. Lines stretch, the basis widens, and county roads carry grain that used to stop 10 miles down the highway. A plant manager heads to a groundwater meeting and hears a proposed 20% cut. He doesn't argue the hydrology, he asks for time. Schools live on water too. A principal in the Panhandle packs trophies into boxes as 2 grades consolidate. Teachers don't chase higher pay, they chase stability. The diner changes hands twice in a year. A nurse picks up a second job after the hospital trims hours on a weaker sales tax base. These aren't dramatic crashes, they're slow leaks that become a flood when the well fails. The quiet truth families don't say into microphones. Identity runs with water lines. The church, the co-op, the Friday lights, none of it pencils without the pump. When the aquifer felt permanent, they planned weddings and harvests years ahead. Now they plan around a motor that might quit in July. Kids do the math. A senior looks from a scholarship brochure to cracked soil by the shop and decides engineering beats coming back to rebuild a system that can't carry the note. Micro moments mark the shift. A pivot tire sits flat all summer because there's no reason to fix what won't run. A seed rep who once opened with 114-day corn starts with wheat, sorghum, fallow and watches commissions thin. A pump installer's calendar creeps county by county, chasing strong meters. None of them meant to become historians of decline. The aquifer wrote their vocabulary. Consumers will feel it in pulses. Less local beef in certain regions, more poultry and pork as feedlots shift. Chains hedge with contracts in wetter basins. Processors pull corn from rivers and lean harder on the Mississippi. The Great Plains, promise flickers, prices jump after heat here, a well failure there, static on a clear channel. To see how the train got on the wrong track, we have to go back to when permanence was built on a temporary account, and everyone agreed not to hear the timer. The historical context, how we engineered the Mirage. To see how the timer got built, go back to the late 194s, when returning soldiers, cheap fuel, and a new faith in engineering met the open sky of the high plains. Reclamation was a creed. Big dams took headlines, but the quiet revolution came from below, deep well turbines, and by the 195s and 196s, center pivots that could walk a field and make rain on command. Dry counties learned to look like Iowa from the air, neat green circles stitched into tan. There was a bargain under the steel. Make the desert bloom wasn't just a slogan, it was policy backed by federal credit, land grant research, and Cold War logic that turned grain into leverage. If America could flood markets with corn and wheat, it could steady allies and undercut rivals. The Ogallala's fossil water, ancient meltwater stored in sand and gravel, became an invisible vault underwriting everything from feed to diplomacy. Major pumping accelerated in the late 194s. The withdrawals that followed would eventually total about 410 cubic kilometers, roughly 85% of Lake Erie's volume, gone from storage. Banks learned the new language fast. Appraisals treated a pivot and a pumping test like a promise. A quarter with 600 gallons per minute fetched a premium. Counties paved roads, built schools, and bonded for hospitals on valuations inflated by irrigated potential. Equipment dealers expanded showrooms for deeper set pumps and taller spans. The supply chain settled around a column of water measured in feet instead of years. Warnings showed early. By the 197s, hydrologists mapped cones of depression and shrinking saturated thickness across the southern high plains. They testified with posters splashed red and explained recharge measured in inches per year, often less. But combines kept rolling, and seed technology paired with water-on-demand delivered records. When the bin is full, a graph is easy to ignore. Efficiency arrived as both savior and trap. Nozzles dropped closer to the canopy, uniformity improved, drip lines appeared in trials, and genetics translated inches into bushels more reliably. The savings rarely appeared as less pumping. They appeared as more irrigated acres or a shift to higher value, thirstier crops. The Jevons paradox wore boots and dust. Efficiency bought time while expectations stayed the same, and lenders used that time to justify bigger notes at better rates. Policy hardened habits. Crop insurance matured from disaster backstop into a core business tool. By the 198s and 199s, revenue protection meant you could plant high-water corn in low-rainfall counties because indemnities softened the downside. Price support steadied cash flow. Then, in the 200s, ethanol mandates bolted a guaranteed buyer onto irrigated corn belts in Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. The statute didn't mention groundwater inches. It landed as more acre-feet pulled from the ground and higher basis that rewarded staying the course. The rulebook kept the throttle open by default. There is no federal cap on pumping the Ogallala. States wrote different doctrines, prior appropriation in places, reasonable use elsewhere, and Texas's rule of capture tempered by local districts. Groundwater was treated as a private right tied to land, even though the aquifer behaves like one slow, leaky bathtub crossing 8 borders. Local boards drew boundaries that fit politics more than flow paths. Cones of Depression didn't care about county lines. Culture sealed the mirage. County fairs posted yield contests like leaderboards. Co-ops ran ads with record bushels. Switching from corn to wheat felt like stepping backward, even when hydrology said forward. When a neighbor drilled another well, it looked like keeping up, not borrowing from tomorrow. Pride aligned with green circles visible on satellite photos your kids could pull up on a phone. Droughts arrived as tests the machine could pass, until it couldn't. A hot spell, pump harder, a dry year, insurance cushions, and next season resets the ledger. Even in wet years, field-scale declines continued because the aquifer counts only what reaches the saturated zone. In 2015, when rains were heavy in parts of the region, some wells still fell. The sound of harvest muffled the signal. By the 201s and 202s, the maps darkened. Kansas Geological Survey crews measured stair steps down, feet lost in hard-hit districts year after year. In the Texas Panhandle and eastern New Mexico, local reports said the same. Wells once roaring, now wheezing. Meanwhile, ethanol plants ran, feed yards filled, and lenders renewed notes on irrigated potential. The miracle became the model became the mortgage. That's how the Mirage was engineered. Post-war faith in control, policy that rewarded thirsty choices, finance that priced gallons per minute as security, efficiency that expanded use, and laws that treated a shared fossil bank like a private checking account. The bill didn't arrive in a headline. It arrived as deeper lifts, louder pumps, and a community organized around a promise the aquifer was never built to keep. Building the empire on a fossil aquifer. Start with the water itself, fossil water. Most of the Ogallala's core doesn't refill on a timeline that fits a note or a lease. In the southern high plains, recharge is inches per year, often less, and much of it never reaches the saturated zone. This isn't a lake with a reliable spring. It's ancient meltwater stored in sand and gravel, moving slowly, patchy as an egg crate. When you lift it, you aren't borrowing from next winter. You're spending the past, a past that, in many places, would take more than 6,000 years to naturally replenish. On the map, dependence forms tight nodes. The Texas Panhandle Triangle, Canyon to Hereford to Dalhart, ties irrigated corn to feedlots and ethanol under high-horsepower pumps. Western Kansas lays another engine across Finney, Haskell, Gray, and Seward counties, where circles feed railheads and packing plants. Slide southwest and eastern New Mexico, Clovis to Portals, sits on thinner saturated thickness, where a handful of feet decides solvable or done. These aren't abstractions. One dry hole can snap a chain. Missed crop, broken cattle contract, idle trucks, and a town's sales tax slipping a point. Infrastructure locked the promise into place. A center pivot isn't just steel. It's a plan, concrete pads, buried pipe, a 150 to 300 horse motor anchored to a pump column, 3-phase power, telemetry, and service pulls you schedule like rain that used to arrive by calendar. You spend 6 figures to make weather irrelevant, and once those dollars are in the ground, loyalty follows. You irrigate because the capital only works if inches move through that machine every season. The sunk cost becomes a schedule. The schedule becomes identity. A micro-story repeats across counties. A panhandle grower installs variable frequency drives to tame electric peaks, swaps nozzles to low-pressure drops brushing the canopy, adds soil probes and a dashboard that pings when tension spikes. It works, uniformity tightens, sets trim by tenths, until a neighbor taps the same pocket. The gauge dips at midnight. End guns miss the corners. He stands in pivot ruts listening to a motor surge like it can confess. Efficiency met competition and lost, because cones of depression merge whether you log in or not. Banks reinforce the inertia. Appraisals list gallons per minute like square footage, depth to water, saturated thickness, measured drawdown test date. A 160 with 600 gallons per minute at 180 feet carries a premium. A 250-gallon well at 240 feet can't touch. Renewal season becomes a quiet stress test. Show the meter reads, show the coverage, show the basis. If the pump curve slips, the rate nudges up, covenants tighten, and the temptation to push one more big year through a tired well grows. Collateral isn't land alone, it's lift, flow, and faith. The technology stack made the decline feel manageable. ET forecasts tuned sets to the tenth of an inch, remote start-stop shaved hours, telemetry texted warnings before a bearing screamed. But the aquifer behaves like physics, not software. Each high-capacity well carves a cone that widens until neighbors' cones merge, turning townships into shared decline curves. That isn't a malfunction, it's the geometry of extraction from a slow reservoir. Meanwhile, profits edged upstream ahead of risk. Seed traits promised defensive yield on fewer inches at higher bag prices. Fertilizer rode each set, invoices due regardless of August pressure. Chemical programs stacked as heat-stressed pests. Utilities billed for deeper lifts and punished peak hours. Lenders collected interest whether the pivot finished. By VIII, most checks had cleared before the first bushel left the field. If the well coughed in late July, the farm ate the loss. The aquifer quietly covered everyone else's certainty. Auction day tells the rest. A clean 7-tower pivot, gearboxes tight, tires good, sells with a whisper. The well is down to 200 gallons per minute at 240 feet. Bidders murmur that number like a diagnosis. The hammer falls below the note's memory. The family lets it go anyway. Sunk cost meets thin water, and the machine rolls down a county road toward a place with a stronger test. Thresholds turned out to be cliffs, not ramps. Heat domes spike vapor pressure deficits, so crops demand more water per day exactly when wells deliver fewer gallons per hour. A hot June steals 2 inches you didn't plan to move. Motors run longer, static levels slip. By August, bowls cavitate, bearings heat, and the next spring starts from a lower baseline even after a wet winter. That step down is how fossil water says time's up. Regulation mapped poorly onto geology. Texas delegated to groundwater conservation districts and desired future conditions with wide variance. Kansas tested local enhanced management areas and hard quotas in pockets. Results were real but regional, slower declines, not reversals. Eastern New Mexico watched dairies, feedyards, and cities chase the same pressure under fragmented rules. The aquifer crossed lines the law respected lines the aquifer ignored. Quality frayed with quantity. In thinning zones, salinity and sodium adsorption ratios crept up, nitrates surfaced where decades of fertilizer met falling heads, and filters backflushed more often. Drip trials clogged. Cotton tolerated a bit, corn didn't. Troughs filmed white. Maintenance budgets swelled while yield stability shrank. The water that remained cost more to lift and more to manage. From above, the circles still looked like certainty, green geometry spinning on schedule. That's how an empire stays built after the vault starts emptying. Water made the land valuable, value demanded more water. Pivots kept turning like clocks, ledgers penciled as if the past were infinite, and the real plan, the only plan, was simple: keep pumping until the account refuses the next withdrawal. That's the story, a coordinated machine fed by ancient inches, optimized for throughput, financed by flow, and measured in feet that fall faster each hot year, while everyone upstream of the wellhead keeps cashing checks on time. Who wins when water disappears? Follow the money as the gauges fall and a different map appears, one where every inch of water is a conduit for upstream margin that clears before harvest ever does. Seed, fertilizer, chemicals, power, debt, and insurance get paid on schedule. If the pump coughs in late July, the loss stays in the field. The invoices don't care. Start with inputs. Seed companies sell defensive hybrids that hold yield with fewer inches at a higher bag price. Fertilizer rides global gas markets, not your static level, so the bill lands whether the pivot finishes or not. Chemical programs stack as heat invites pests and disease. Those passes protect potential, even when August pressure says potential is shrinking. By VIII, most costs are sunk. If a well sputters at tassel, the margin vanishes on the stalk. The input checks already cleared. Then the lender, credit was built on irrigated potential. As water slips, interest does, covenants tighten. Banks encourage revenue protection to guard debt service. Premium subsidies paid by taxpayers keep those policies affordable, and reinsurance spreads the bet. Now the note is insulated even if the well fails. The farm's volatility is buffered with public money. The aquifer underwrites everyone's certainty. Losses socialize, the plan stays the same. Insurance shapes choices. Revenue guarantees tilt planting toward high water corn because indemnities cushion the downside. In a hot July, when the pump can't hold, the claim fills the hole. That stabilizes families and protects creditors, real benefits, but it also keeps aggregate demand on the aquifer high. The structure rewards the decision to carry on and punishes restraint only on paper. Companies administering policies collect their cut, whether the pivot stops at R3 or runs to black layer. Land turns into a water-indexed asset. Parcels under strong pivots trade like leases on a depleting field, with gallons per minute listed like proven reserves. Investors buy water-secure circles, lock cash leases, then exit before declines show on public maps. Appraisals hinge on test numbers that can change faster than the paperwork. When the flow slips, value steps down, management fees and interest already settled. Utilities don't lose. Every extra foot of lift is another kilowatt-hour build. Peak pricing punishes hot afternoons exactly when pumps can't rest. Producers install variable frequency drives to shave costs. The grid enjoys steadier load. Co-ops plan upgrades justified by irrigation demand curves. Capital costs socialize across ratepayers who will still be around when the well is. The meter spins while the head drops. Ethanol rides a policy lever. Renewable fuel mandates bolt a guaranteed buyer onto regional corn. Plants widen their draw radius as local water thins, push basis, and keep grinders fed. Bondholders want cash flow, not saturated thickness, so trains roll. The statute doesn't say pump more groundwater. It lands as more acre-feet out of the ground. Distillers' grains that once looped back to local feedyards shipped to yards where wells or rivers still perform. Packers sit where cattle turn into schedules. When yard counts thin across the southern high plains, consolidated processors adjust line speeds and procurement maps, pulling cattle from where water and feed hold. In tight cattle years, spreads can widen. Logistics flexibility pays shareholders before it pays counties. A regional shortage becomes a margin somewhere else. Retail hedges quietly. Grocery chains secure protein from water-rich basins, rewrite contracts for redundancy, and shift beef specs to blend more trim. Poultry and pork integrators tweak rations, more sorghum when high plains corn slips, and shift grow out to places where taps don't tremble in August. The case looks the same. The sourcing map moves away from red aquifer zones. There's a human ledger inside each spreadsheet. A co-op agronomist walks a field knowing the well won't carry it, but still recommends a protective pass to guard what's left. He has quotas and a mortgage. The invoice clears, the pivot later doesn't. A banker urges more coverage to sleep at night. He's protecting his portfolio and the family. A plant manager asks a water board for time because idle shifts ripple through a county. None of them set out to drain a fossil bank. Incentives line them up that way. Speculation skims the glide. Brokerage commissions clip transactions as circles change hands. Management firms collect for water stewardship, reporting even when basin-wide pumping barely budges. Corporate sustainability stories promise resilience. There's one test that matters. Did total withdrawals fall? If not, it's narrative covering a trend line. Meanwhile, small towns internalize the costs. A school loses a section. The cafe drops a shift. The hospital trims hours. No indemnity reimburses the choir that loses 10 kids or the volunteer fire crew short a driver. Those are the unfunded liabilities of depletion. Put it bluntly, firms positioned upstream of the wellhead, inputs, lenders, insurers, utilities, packers, and mandate-propped buyers capture predictable cash flows. The people living on variable inches, farm families, yard crews, truckers, teachers, carry the volatility and the identity risk. The lie wasn't that hard work built abundance. It's that the structure privatized gains, socialized losses, and kept the pump humming because the profits clear first. And here's the twist. As cones of depression deepen, that upstream map strengthens for a while. More lift means more power sold, more defensive traits, more premiums, more freight. The aquifer funds the certainty on everyone else's balance sheet, right up to the moment the pump hits air. Then the invoices stop meeting the acres. That's when the system that won while water disappeared discovers it was standing on the same empty vault. The policy web that locks the throttle open. From the wellhead to the Capitol, the rulebook reads like permission. Groundwater in key Ogallala states is tied to land, private rights over reservoir that behaves like one slow, leaky bathtub across 8 borders. A deed line suggests ownership. Physics says shared storage. That mismatch isn't a footnote. It's the engine that keeps the throttle open when the gauge is already sagging. Local control sounds fair until you map flow. Boards elected by neighbors set allocations, and reporting rules inside districts drawn to fit politics more than hydrology. Kansas and Nebraska meter broadly and publish annual data. Parts of Oklahoma still rely on permitted acre-feet and self-reported pumping with limited metering. Texas delegates to dozens of groundwater conservation districts, each defining desired future conditions with wide variance. Meanwhile, cones of depression ignore county lines. What one district tolerates can drain a neighbor's cushion 2 miles away. The honor system shows up in ordinary ways. A producer estimates acre-inches months after harvest. Another shifts pumping to nights to dodge peak power, hoping attention fades with darkness. Where meters exist and enforcement has teeth, decline's slow, documented in western Kansas's local enhanced management areas, where verified cuts flattened curves. Where metering is spotty, paperwork trails reality, and short-staffed offices struggle to audit. The aquifer declines in real time. Reports arrive after Christmas. Then policy hardwires demand. Federal renewable fuel standards bolt a guaranteed buyer onto High Plains corn. In the 200s and 201s that mandate anchored plants in Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, rail spurs, payrolls, bonds, so every water discussion carries jobs as subtext. A board proposes a 20% cut. The plant manager doesn't contest hydrology. He asks for time. The statute doesn't say pump more groundwater. It lands as more acre-feet pulled from thin pockets to meet volumes that don't flex with saturated thickness. Crop insurance quietly turns risk into routine. Revenue protection cushions high water choices in low rainfall counties. Premium subsidies, paid by taxpayers, keep coverage cheap enough to pencil corn where physics argues wheat. If July heat strips yield, the indemnity fills the hole, stabilizing families and creditors, yes, but socializing the risk of private pumping and keeping aggregate demand on the aquifer high. The program rewards carrying on. Restraint looks like leaving money on the table. Lawyering threads the patchwork. Texas still echoes the rule of capture, softened by district plans. Elsewhere, reasonable use and prior appropriation govern permits and adjudication. None of it was built for a fossil aquifer with inches of recharge in the south and feet pumped out each season. The law assumes variability around a steady base. What we've got is decline around a lowering floor. Courts protect vested rights. Hydrology counts actual inches. Interstate politics frees the big levers. 8 states sit on this reservoir. No federal statute caps withdrawals from a single state well. Washington funds conservation, research, and pilots, but avoids nationwide caps on a patchwork resource. Governors defend local control and agricultural economies. Senators protect ethanol. Representatives sell flexibility. Nobody wants to trigger appraisal drops, school consolidation, or plant closures. So the default holds. Voluntary programs, stronger data, no binding ceilings. Utilities add a quiet lever. Time of use pricing punishes midday pumping. Producers slide to nights. Demand response smooths the grid. Total gallons don't necessarily fall. Every extra foot of lift is another kilowatt-hour build. Rate structures rarely reward absolute basin-wide reductions. They reward load management. The meter spins while the head drops, and co-ops plan upgrades justified by irrigation demand curves the aquifer won't sustain. Conservation carrots help at the edges. EQIP pays for nozzle upgrades. CRP retires brittle corners. Regional partnerships build recharge basins where geomorphology allows. Nebraska's integrated surface groundwater plans, backed by universal metering and active management, stabilized parts of the north where rivers feed the aquifer. In the south, where intense downpours run off crusted soils and slow soakers, a rare managed decline is the best outcome. Voluntary cuts buy time. They don't rewrite the budget. Federal agencies know the stakes. The 2024 Ogallala Summit summarized it plainly. Roughly 410 cubic kilometers, about 85% of Lake Erie's volume, have been lost since major pumping began in the late 194s, and some of the most productive zones now measure usable life in decades. A warming climate shortens that timeline by spiking crop water demand as wells deliver less per hour. The data is public. The throttle remains open because no single actor owns the brake. Here's how enforcement meets bonds. A district drafts cuts to match a hydrologic budget. Hearings fill with bankers worried about collateral, school boards about valuations, seed reps promising drought stacks, feedyard owners fretting throughput. County commissioners waive bond covenants tied to irrigated tax rolls. Elections approach. The plan returns thinner, 10% instead of 20, carve-outs, resets after harvest. The aquifer doesn't wait for votes. And there's the city's blind spot. Municipal wells share formations with farms. Towns drill deeper, bond for storage, and purchase upstream rights late. When a feedlot and a city chase the same contractor after a heat wave, policy conversations turn into logistics. Cooling centers open, pressure zones throttle, boil notices scatter through text trees. Everyone agrees something must change once the pump hits air. So the web looks like this. Private rights incentivize capture. Local boards fight physics with political maps. Ethanol mandates hardwire demand. Crop insurance cushions high water choices. Utilities monetize deeper lifts. Conservation softens edges. Interstate politics dodge caps. Each strand is rational alone. Together, they keep the pump on. And when saturated thickness slips below the bowls, policy falls silent. Motors burn, wells cough, towns scramble for municipal drilling. The debate ends not with a vote, but with air in the line. That's the tell, a system strong enough to sustain depletion and too weak to stop it before the pump does. The tipping points we've already crossed. Walk a section line in southwest Kansas or the Panhandle and you'll feel it. The land slumps into shallow bowls that weren't here in the 199s. Cones of depression that used to be isolated now overlap, turning townships into broad collapse zones. A well that once pulled 600 gallons a minute limps at 180. Another 2 miles east hits air by late July. These aren't smooth declines. They arrive as stair steps. A hot summer, a longer lift, a cavitating pump, and a baseline that never quite returns, even after a wet winter. The energy spiral makes sure nobody misses the message. Every extra foot of lift adds kilowatt hours or diesel the budget can't ignore. Motors that ran cool at 120 feet grind at 260. Bearings fail faster under heat domes. A producer who used to irrigate 8 circles on a tight rotation starts triaging, shutting one down to keep 2 alive, then 2 to keep 1. Scheduling becomes emergency management with polite names. Quality phrase with quantity. In thinning zones, salinity edges up, sodium adsorption ratios creep, and nitrates show where decades of fertilizer meet falling heads. Filters backflush more, drip trials clog, troughs film white. Cotton tolerates a bit, corn doesn't. A pivot that once ran like a metronome now needs babysitting, pressure tweaks, filter swaps, midnight decisions that used to wait for morning. Then the wind rediscovers old tricks. Fallowed fields throw soil when spring fronts arrive. Shelter belts planted after the 193s have aged out. Budgets delay replanting. Where residue and no-till didn't take root early, hardpan sheds those sudden 2-inch downpours the National Weather Service keeps logging. The rain that fell in May doesn't recharge. It races off in sheets. The aquifer counts only what reaches the saturated zone. Lately, the ledger shows noise, not deposits. A micro-story outside Clovis keeps getting told. A mom tapes towels along a windowsill because dust sneaks in on north winds. Her oldest once detasseled. That crew folded after irrigated acres shrank. The diner cut breakfast hours. Her neighbors well shifted to town use only. Now they haul for livestock twice a week. None of these moments is dramatic alone. Together, they feel like another step down nobody can climb back. Psychology flips before policy does. Families who said, "We'll make it up next year," switch to "Let's make it last 3 more." They cap the shallow hole, move pipe to the deepest well, and plan depletion instead of recovery. In western Kansas LEPAs and local enhanced management areas, meters prove cuts slowed the fall, real progress, yet the baseline hasn't climbed. In Texas districts with permissive targets, red zones spread faster. Side-by-side counties write a lesson no whiteboard can soften. Technology helps and then hits a wall. Shorter season hybrids dodge some August stress, drop nozzles trim evaporation, soil probes text when tension spikes. Those inches saved matter. They also tempt a familiar mistake, stretching limited water across more acres, Fine until a heat dome parks for 6 days. Efficiency wins at the field edge. The shared reservoir still slides because there's no basin-wide ceiling to lock savings into storage. Auctions now read like controlled retreats. A clean 7-tower pivot sells short because the test hole is down to 200 gallons per minute at 240 feet. A family lets it go, keeps the home place, shifts to wheat, sorghum fallow, and watches costs drop while revenue steadies lower. A teacher files for a transfer. A packer quietly reroutes procurement north and east. No headlines announce it. The sourcing map redraws anyway. Livestock systems feel the heat first. On 100-degree days, a 1,000-pound steer can drink 20 gallons, half in a narrow window. If pressure slips, mortality risk climbs. Yards add shade, misters, and storage, then bid grain 300 miles away. Ethanol plants widen draw radii or seed volume to river-adjacent facilities. The local loop, irrigated corn to ethanol to distillers' grains to cattle, stretches until local becomes marketing, not geography. The clearest tell is the language. Neighbors stop asking if the aquifer will run out someday and start asking when their circle becomes dryland with a dead power line in the middle. Kansas Geological Survey crews report another foot down across hard-hit districts. Texas Panhandle measurements show multi-decade drops consistent with roughly 40-plus feet on average since the mid-190. New Mexico's eastern counties echo 19-foot declines. The 2024 Ogallala Summit put it bluntly, about 410 cubic kilometers, roughly 85% of Lake Erie, are gone from storage since major pumping accelerated in the late 194s, and the usable life of key zones now measures in decades. Here's the hinge: nights used to be recovery. Warmer evenings keep stomata open, so plants keep drinking while wells fall behind. June that once cost an inch now exacts 2. By August, bowls clear less, motors run hotter, and cavitation arrives earlier in the week. Even after a generous winter, static levels don't rebound to last year's mark. That's the staircase: down a step, pause, down again. So the tipping points we've crossed aren't speeches. They're gauges, invoices, auctions, and bus routes. They sound like a bearing that won't cool and a choir missing 10 voices. They look like a green circle that became a crescent, then a half moon, then stubble. The aquifer didn't fail all at once. It taught people to budget inches, to trade horsepower for patience, and to judge success by a flatter decline. That's the only scoreboard left that keeps the taps on. The pivot to dryland and its limits. When a well falls below usefulness, the first pivot isn't steel, it's mindset. You trade horsepower for patience and rebuild the farm around sky water, sorghum that rolls its leaves when the sun bites, wheat that sleeps through summer, sunflowers that mine what's left. Green circles fade to crescents, then half moons. Corn contracts turn into we'll see. Truck counts drop. The calendar shifts, less midnight checking pressure, more watching fronts build and choosing a day by shovel, not gate. Dryland isn't a downgrade, it's a different game. Planting windows tighten. Miss a rain by 48 hours and you lose a month. Seed choices lean short season and drought tolerant, not to chase records, but to dodge August's heat wall. Every pass burns moisture, so tillage lightens. Residue becomes currency. Shade the soil and you bank a day of evapotranspiration for July. A grower who read pump curves now reads soil by feel. Crumbly means room to store an inch. Crusted means runoff if you blink. Technology doesn't vanish, it gets repurposed. Those soil probes that pinged pivot schedules now confirm whether a storm took. Telemetry watches bins instead of pumps. Some pivots stay up as skeletons over wheat, used for a life-saving inch at boot stage if the deepest well can limp a day. Variable rate maps shift from water sets to seeding density, thin on wind, scoured hills, heavier in foot slopes that hold moisture. Useful tools, all of them, until physics sets the ceiling. Here's where limits show. Efficiency's old trap returns in a new hat. Save moisture with residue and sharp timing, and the temptation is to stretch acres, 2 limited irrigation circles, instead of 1 fully watered field. It works until a heat dome parks for 6 days. Then both fields fail at once. Managed depletion sounds disciplined, quotas that force restraint, but quotas don't add inches to the sky. In western Kansas's voluntary cut zones, meters proved declines slowed real progress, yet baselines didn't climb. The win is time, not recovery, measured in fewer emergency nights, not in higher yields. Soils decide who lands softest. Years of heavy tillage and irrigation left fields that shed the 2-inch downpours the National Weather Service now logs more often. In those, big rains carve gullies instead of storing inches. Neighbors who went early on no-till covers and prairie strips hold water longer. Their May thunderstorm becomes a July root reserve. You can't build 10 years of structure in one winter. Heat shortens the window. Beats of intensity outpace infiltration until practice catches up. A micro-story out of Gray County keeps traveling. A family capped their last week well, left the pivot standing, and seeded a prairie strip across the hilltop to break wind and catch snow. Year 1 was meager. Year 2, a line of May storms set wheat right. Yields didn't touch old irrigated corn, but costs fell and the note relaxed because volatility calmed. They didn't beat the past, they built a steadier floor. Livestock exposes another boundary. Feedlots that counted on local corn now truck grain from river counties. Some yards scale down and add shade, misters, and storage to ride heat emergencies. Others relocate toward water-secure basins. Dairies chase closed-loop dreams, digesters, manure capture, water recycling, but the loop still needs a source you can promise. Dryland grain can feed cattle. It struggles to feed the old throughput on a July schedule. Markets adjust around the pivot. Sorghum premiums flicker as integrators tweak rations. Sunflower crushers eye-rail adjacent sites. Wheat returns to rotations that fell out of fashion when water was cheap. But price signals don't change the sky. A good May matters more than any spreadsheet. Procurement teams quietly rewrite tenders. Alternative origin accepted, no penalty, if drought or restrictions hit. Proof that reliability is now a clause, not an assumption. Nebraska offers contrast and caution. Where universal metering, river tide recharge, and active local control hold, confidence in irrigation survives many months. Slides south into Texas, and districts with lenient targets let economics write the rules. Declines steepen, and dryland arrives like being pushed, not stepping. Kansas sits in the middle, showing quotas can slow the slide if politics holds, and that slowing isn't reversing. There's a culture limit too. A pivot was a scoreboard. Shutting it off can feel like leaving the league you trained for. That's where new pride has to root, counting inches saved, not just bushels, celebrating residue that held a storm, handing out a county ribbon for best water budget next to top yield. Co-ops can share dividends when basin targets are met. Lenders can shave rates for verified cuts and strong soil scores. Pride moves toward restraint, and staying becomes an identity, not a confession. Dryland is honesty with physics. It can carry families if the note, the banker, and the community match the new baseline, leaner revenue, lower costs, steadier risk. But those choices don't end at a fence. They ripple to packing floors, ethanol bid sheets, school rosters, and grocery stickers. The pivot to dryland buys time. It doesn't buy rain. The next act isn't grit alone. It's rules and money that make restraint possible. The food chain, Shockwave. The first tremor hits the sale barn. Fewer calves show on Wednesday because summer grass crisped early and irrigated corn didn't hold. Buyers lean on rails, bid thinner, and pencil feed with a longer freight line. A yard that used to pull from elevators 10 miles away now dispatches trucks 300 miles to a river terminal. Freight becomes a ration ingredient. The same steer eats. Every mouthful costs more miles, more diesel, more time. Unknown to most shoppers, packers watch water maps like weather. When yard counts thin across the southern high plains, line speeds drift north and east. A plant in the panhandle trims a shift, another near the Platte adds hours. Labor follows jobs, cattle follow feed, beef follows both. The kill floor doesn't care about county pride, it cares about throughput and cold storage. Water decides where the hook swings and how long it swings there. Inside stressed zones, heat and thin wells change routines. A packing plant stages cattle at dawn to dodge 3 o'clock bottlenecks. Shade goes up, misting systems hum, and big storage tanks sit like insurance on concrete pads. Insurers add clauses, heat emergency plans, documented water redundancy, backup pumps tested weekly. The plant stays open, but operating costs climb, and one missed track from a feedlot ripples into overtime, idle crews, and a maintenance window that suddenly moves into Saturday. Protein reorganizes along water reliability. Poultry steps into gaps first. Integrators with mills along the Mississippi tweak rations, more sorghum when High Plains corn slips, and ship fresh packs with contracts tied to river basins. Hogs adjust too. Swine rations lean toward what barge traffic and rail can guarantee, not what used to spin under pivots. Cases look the same. The sourcing map slides toward water-secure corridors. Ethanol quietly redraws feed loops. Plants perched on thinning slices widen draw radii, then seed volume to river-adjacent facilities when freight breaks the math. Distillers' grains that once looped back to local feed yards load into railcars bound for yards where wells or rivers still perform. A feeder in Kansas signs DDGS from Iowa because the neighboring plant can't promise steady runs through August. The local loop stretches until local turns into a story more than a fact. At grocery headquarters, procurement hedges. They lock chicken and pork from multi-basin suppliers, blend more trim into beef specs, and write tenders with redundancy clauses. Private label buyers add a line nobody notices. Alternative origin accepted, no penalty, if drought or restrictions hit. The shelf looks unchanged. The supply chain behind it took the long way around the wells and paid a toll at each detour. Micro moments make it tangible. A school cafeteria manager opens bids and sees beef lasagna jump 10%. She adds 2 chicken days and swaps fresh for frozen produce during late summer spikes. Kids don't notice the Ogallala in the menu, they notice different trays. A taco truck in Amarillo raises prices $0.25 per taco and tapes a sign that just says, "Beef went up." Exports feel it next. A buyer in South Korea asks if August volumes are assured and gets a hedged answer. Brazil offers beef with a steady delivery window. U.S. corn slips to second-tier slots when river levels and aquifer stress collide. Reliable supplier still prints on decks. Counterparties price the risk with wider spreads and split tenders. We don't lose the market, we lose the cushion that once covered late trains and hot weeks. Retail prices translate water into stickers. Beef climbs first at the grind, steaks lag a few weeks. Pork holds, chicken inches up. Households shift baskets without thinking about aquifers, more thighs, fewer chuck roast, smaller packs. Restaurants redesign menus, more pulled pork, fewer brisket specials in July. The story doesn't announce itself. It shows up on receipts and in specials boards crossed out by noon. Upstream logistics rewire. Grain merchandisers replace short hauls with routes stitched to river basis. Railroads adjust lanes, more east-west into water-secure processors, fewer southbound loops into brittle counties. Cold storage migrates where taps don't wobble. Cargo insurers raise premiums for heat-sensitive loads and demand documented contingencies, shade, staging, spare pumps, before coverage binds. The invisible tax of distance and uncertainty gets paid in quarters and dollars at every link. There's a scene at a Midwestern port that says it all. A merchandiser fields a call from a High Plains ethanol plant begging for spot barges because local draw failed. He finds 2 at a premium. The invoice clears. The plant meets mandate volumes. That premium walks downstream into feed ration costs, then retail meat. Multiply that by 1,000 small fixes, and depletion becomes dinner one surcharge at a time. Across town, a nurse works a double because the hospital cut staff when the county's sales tax take slipped with irrigated acres. She buys groceries at 10 at night and watches the total climb. That's the shockwave. A gauge reading turns into a bid, into a truck, into a shift change, into a receipt. It isn't a cliff. It's a drumbeat you feel at the register long after the pump shut off. Geopolitics of a thirsty superpower. When America's water cushion thins, contracts turn into questions. Our credibility rode on a simple promise. Grain shows up, beef ships on time, invoices clear without drama. Now every dry High Plains season flashes on global screens. Futures spreads widen when Kansas wells slip. Buyers in Seoul and Tokyo start asking for assurance letters. The brand still says reliable supplier. The asterisk is water. Rivals don't have to beat us, they just have to be predictable. Brazil leans into rain-fed soy and a second crop of corn, expanding feed capacity and selling a schedule more than a price. Russia pushes Black Sea wheat and discounts hard when US basis jumps. Argentina cycles in when rains allow. Australia fills windows we miss. None of them offers perfection. They offer confidence that a boat will leave on Thursday. At home, capital migrates toward water certainty. The Great Lakes Compact slams the door on diversions, and that firm door turns into a magnet. Processors court counties with allocations they can bank on and cold intakes that won't blink in August. Along the Mississippi, barge-fed mills and crushers pitch redundancy. If one basin sputters, another can backfill. A site selector reads water secure before tax abatements. The Ogallala's decline redraws the industrial map without a press release. Allies adapt their playbooks. A Japanese buyer splits tenders, half from High Plains networks, half from Upper Midwest plants tied to rivers. A South Korean packer asks for dual-origin beef programs to hedge August heat. Mexico hedges shoulder-month corn with South American contracts. Nobody's snubbing the US. They're diversifying away from headlines about wells. Here's the hard trade we keep dodging. Conserve the aquifer or protect short-term export share. Hard caps stretch municipal supplies and buy farm communities time. They also trim irrigated acres now, cutting surpluses that anchor our export posture. Politically, that pits local survival against geopolitical muscle. A senator hears both refrains: hold global markets, keep our taps and schools. The compromise so far is muddle: conservation carrots, no sticks, and faith that technology outruns physics. Security planners run a different math. Food inflation is politics with a grocery cart. A sum of heat pulses that shave yields becomes price spikes that hit households already stretched. Abroad, tight corn and wheat markets dent allies' budgets and seed unrest in places where food takes half a paycheck. When our shipments wobble, rivals don't just sell more, they ask for favors. A grain deal becomes leverage, a vote at the UN, a port concession, an air corridor. There's a moment on a trade mission in Sao Paulo that tells the shift. The US delegation pitches beef and distillers' grains. A buyer asks, if August is hot, can you still hit the window? The room pauses. The lead says, we'll meet volumes across our network. The buyer nods and splits the tender, Brazil for August, US for October. The contract closes, the habit changes. Diversification becomes standard, not emergency. Great Lakes governance quietly becomes a choke point and a promise. Cities and companies shift there precisely because the compact won't bleed the basin. Certainty becomes strategy. Water-rich counties price their advantage with site approvals that lock allocations, wastewater capacity, and rail to ports. Stable gallons turns into an asset class. Washington faces a fork that won't wait for perfect models. Tie federal support to hydrologic compliance, premium subsidies, disaster aid, loan guarantees contingent on meters and cuts, and fund permanent retirements in crimson zones. That's domestic stability first, export share second. Or lean into output, keep irrigated acres high with insurance and mandates, and run the aquifer hotter to hold markets a bit longer. One bill arrives now in checks and pride. The other arrives later in shocks you can't finesse. Markets are already pricing water risk. Credit terms reference meters and district compliance. Procurement contracts add heat clauses and alternative origin. Basis moves on depletion news as much as weather. The aquifer used to be a hidden asset nobody depreciated. Climate forced depreciation onto spreadsheets. Geopolitics made it expensive. Meanwhile, our own map fractures. Beef capacity drifts north and east. Ethanol centers on rivers. Cold storage follows taps. The High Plains still produce, they just do it with less cushion. Which means every August dome, every extra foot of lift, every policy delay echoes past our borders. A thirsty superpower doesn't only change what it grows, it changes how the world plans dinner. Once partners learn to live without your certainty, they don't sprint back when it rains. The false solutions we keep buying. When systems crack, we reach for miracle tech. It sounds brave, it avoids the word less. Start with the favorite, desalination. People say, Israel did it, why can't we? Because Israel lifts water from sea to city across short distances at low elevation, and most of it goes to taps, not fields. The High Plains sits 1,000 miles from an ocean and thousands of feet higher. Every gallon would climb more than a mile in altitude, cross multiple states, thread compacts and private land, then spread across millions of acres. By the time a drop hits a field, it's the most expensive inch you could pour on corn. Commodity margins don't pay that bill. Cue the pipeline deck. A consultant clicks and a blue snake runs from the Gulf to the Panhandle. Rights of way through ranches, eminent domain fights, tribes with senior claims, river compacts that don't bend, federal permits, pump stations every few dozen miles, evaporation losses, security, maintenance, and bonds bigger than many state budgets before a shovel hits dirt. Then operate it for decades with rising power costs to recreate last century's footprint in a hotter world. The pipeline isn't a plan, it's a way to avoid saying cut. Some pitch the Great Lakes like a national tap. The compact shuts that door. Governors guard it because certainty is their advantage. Even if politics cracked it, you hit the same wall: astronomical capital, legal warfare, and a freshwater region that learned to price its water. Water moves best as virtual water, grain, meat, oilseeds, shipped from water-rich basins, not as a river in a tube to prop up a footprint physics already vetoed. Aquifer recharge sounds elegant. Put water back when it rains. In the north, tied to rivers with sandier soils, managed recharge and conjunctive management work. Nebraska proves it. In the southern high plains, the window is narrow. Intense downpours run off crusted soil. Slow soakers are rarer. You can build check dams and basins and catch inches in wet springs. It helps. It doesn't match decades of overdraft where recharge is inches per year and withdrawals are feet per season. It's a tool inside a cap, not a substitute for one. Cloud seeding wears a new jacket on the oldest wish. Silver iodide flutters, optimism follows. The signal is small and noisy, a few percent sometimes, often indistinguishable from background. And rain falls where wind and temperature allow, not where your pivot needs it. It's weather gambling sold as management. Super efficiency is the next sales call. Drip everything, sensor everything, model everything. Drip shines on high-value crops with clean water. It clogs in thinning, mineral-heavy wells and costs a fortune to maintain at scale. Pivots with drops, soil probes and ET forecasts absolutely save inches. And then the Jevons paradox walks back in. Without a hard cap, those inches turn into more irrigated acres or thirstier crops. We already ran that experiment. We got slower decline, not recovery. Genetics wear the cape next. Drought-tolerant corn that makes grain without water. Traits help: shorter season, stronger roots, better heat tolerance. They buy days, sometimes a week. They don't rewrite vapor pressure deficits when the plant's demand outruns supply or conjure inches from a column that isn't there. Inside a capped system, they're powerful. Sold as a pass to keep the throttle open, they're a license to delay the conversation. Markets step in as a philosophy: let price fix it. Price moves water to the highest bidder today, not the most resilient mix over decades. If the only cost most producers feel is electricity, they'll pump until the pump won't. Tradable rights can help only after you set a real hydrologic budget, meter every high-capacity well, and enforce the ceiling. Without those, it's rhetoric that arrives too late. Corporate sustainability arrives with glossy PDFs. Some dollars fund real practice, residue, covers, verified cuts. Others dress status quo as stewardship. There's one test that isn't negotiable. Did total basin withdrawals fall? If not, it's branding laid over depletion. We buy these stories because they let us stay who we were. DeSalle promises water without cuts. Pipelines promise geography without trade-offs. Drip promises efficiency without ceilings. Genetics promise yield without inches. Markets promise discipline without meters. The physics don't sign any of those contracts. So what works? Not a miracle governance. Hard caps tied to a hydrologic budget. Universal metering with timely audits. Paid retirements and multi-year leases that idle brittle quarters and protect municipal capture zones. Insurance redesigned so premium subsidies step down on thirsty crops under stress and step up for rotations that sip. Utilities that reward absolute reductions, not just time shifting. Ethanol volumes that flex down where saturated thickness slips below thresholds and shift toward river-tide plants. Soil work that banks storm inches, residue, windbreaks, prairie strips, paid on measured infiltration gains, not box-checked practices. Corporate dollars tied to verified basin-level withdrawals, not plot-level anecdotes. None of that sells like a moonshot. It reads like triage with a plan. But triage with a plan is how you land a damaged plane. The false solutions buy applause, the real ones buy years, and years are the only currency the aquifer still accepts. The only levers that work, and their price. The fixes that matter start with a blunt word: caps. Not desired futures, not guidelines, hard ceilings tied to a hydrologic budget that reflects what the aquifer can actually spare. Universal meters on every high-capacity well, audits that don't wait a year, a ratchet that tightens until withdrawals align with realistic recharge, or where recharge is inches and depletion is decades deep, until declines flatten to a pace towns can outlast. The price posts immediately: fewer irrigated acres, lower appraisals, thinner margins, and families rewriting plans they thought were permanent. Enforcement isn't a sheriff at a gate. It's a ledger everyone can see: monthly pools, public dashboards, and district totals that match the budget, not the wishes. Western Kansas proved discipline works. Local enhanced management areas slowed the fall when cuts were verified. Scale that accountability basin-wide, and you buy time measured in harvests, not headlines. But cuts alone create casualties. Some operations can't survive the drop in inches. That's why the second lever has to stand beside caps: money to stop pumping. Call them exits and breathers, permanent retirements and multi-year leases. Pay to idle brittle quarters where saturated thickness is already thin. Pay to protect municipal capture zones before cones crash the town wells. Pay long enough for a second act to take root. It feels expensive until you stack it against hollowed tax bases, emergency drilling, shuttered plants, and bailouts after collapse. Pilots in eastern New Mexico showed producers will take fair, transparent leases that last long enough to plan. Scale that logic where the map is darkest, and you turn unmanaged decline into a choice with a runway. Third, change what pays. You can't just say plant crops that sip. Bankers need cash flow. That means transition grants, forward contracts, and real floors for rotations that live under caps. Sorghum with verified premiums tied to resilience. Sunflowers with crushers close enough to guarantee a bid. Wheat with insurance that respects drought risk without nudging irrigated corn. When revenue protection tilts toward lower water choices, behavior moves fast because notes do. Insurance needs a gut rehab. Today, revenue guarantees and subsidies make high water choices survivable in redline zones. Redesign the program so premium subsidies step down on thirsty crops where caps are tight and step up for rotations that cut basin-level risk. Add a bright line rule: if you want the backstop, show the meter, show the cut, and show the soil work that banks inches when storms come. Taxpayers carry the risk. Taxpayers can require physics. Claims still protect families and lenders. The structure finally protects the reservoir too. Utilities can help more than they have. Time of use rates smooth load. They don't save inches. Build rate structures that reward absolute reductions certified by meters, rebates for decommissioned horsepower, credits for verified volume cuts during heat domes, co-funded storage so yards and plants don't panic pump at 3 in the afternoon. Tie rural power, co-op financing to district compliance so electrons don't subsidize depletion. Every extra foot of lift shouldn't be automatic revenue. It should be a signal to cut demand. Ethanol needs a flex valve. Mandated volumes landed as unblinking demand on thinning counties. Keep the policy if Congress insists, but link eligibility to basin health. Where saturated thickness slips below thresholds, volumes ratchet down or shift to plants tied to rivers. Pair that with grants for industrial efficiency, less water per gallon, on-site storage for heat emergencies, and public reporting that verifies reductions. The goal isn't to kill a peril, it's to stop treating fossil inches like endless inputs. Soil is the quiet lever that multiplies all the others. Residue, windbreaks, and prairie strips don't refill a fossil bank, but they bank storm inches and trim evapotranspiration on the worst days. Pay for outcomes, not checklists. Infiltration gains measured by field tests. Windbreak replanting treated as infrastructure. Agronomy support that fits county soils and calendars. When a 2-inch downpour stores instead of scours, a quota stretches farther without pretending sky water changed. Culture has to move too. A pivot was a scoreboard. Shutting it off can feel like exile. Change what counties celebrate. Ribbons for inches saved alongside top yield. Co-op dividends when the basin hits targets. Lender rate breaks for verified cuts paired with strong soil scores. Pride shifts toward restraint, and staying becomes identity, not apology. That matters when the choice is one more big irrigated bet or a drier rotation that keeps a family in the bleachers. Cities don't get a pass. Bond for storage, fix leaks, purchase upstream rights in capture zones, and help sequence retirements that protect taps. Join compacts with funding, not slogans, so municipal security doesn't come at agriculture's last minute. When towns put money on the table early, July doesn't end in boil notices and emergency trucks aimed at failing mains. Finally, set the federal trigger before the crash. Tie disaster aid, premium subsidies, and loan guarantees to meters, verified cuts, and district compliance. Fund permanent retirements in crimson zones at valuations that let families land, not fall. Stand up a multi-state council that publishes basin dashboards monthly, pumping, thickness, cuts hit or missed, so politics can't hide behind slow reports. Nebraska's integrated surface groundwater management becomes a model where rivers feed the bank. Stricter plans in Kansas scale with teeth. Texas districts earn dollars by aligning targets with physics. None of this sells like a miracle. It costs money, pride, green circles, and a story about endless growth. But it turns free fall into glide. And glide is the only path that leaves water in taps, kids in stands, and fields that still produce when August arrives hotter than last year. Lives reshaped by water truth. The auction starts slow, like everyone else waiting for someone else to blink. A pivot stands like a skeleton on the quarter's crown. The ringman taps steel, calls the year, the span count, the gearboxes. The number that matters isn't on the placard, it's the well's last test, 200 gallons a minute at 240 feet. Bidders murmur it like a diagnosis. A grandfather in a sun-bleached denim shirt watches the price stall below the figure he's carried in his head since his son came home from college. He nods once when the gavel falls. It wipes a note. It frees no water. Cross town, a teacher folds classroom maps into boxes. Enrollment slid under the line for 2 sections, and the board voted to consolidate. She used to run an irrigation lab in ag science, timing sets with students over model field. Now she packs the poster on soil horizons, prints a resume, and calls a superintendent in a river county. Outside her window, pivot ruts hold last month's rain, and a rusting end gun points at a sky that became a schedule. The door clicks behind her. She lets herself cry once in the parking lot. Micro-stories stack like receipts. A pump installer flips through a notebook marked with addresses where he's pulled bowls twice in 2 years. Same site, deeper set, hotter bearings. He drives farther each week, chasing pockets that still hum. A feedlot mechanic bolts shade structures in June, then takes a job at a packing plant up north when pen counts sag. A seed dealer rewrites his pitch from 112-day corn to a wheat, sorghum, fallow rotation, and watches commissions thin. None of them trained to narrate decline. The aquifer taught them the words. The question creeps onto agendas. Who bears the cuts and who banked the gains? A tribe on the southern rim points to springs that fed ceremonies long before pivots. Those flows shrank as pumps multiplied outside the reservation. Their claims are senior on paper, crowded in practice by lenders, ethanol managers, and city attorneys. A 4th-generation farmer stands and says he mortgaged everything on irrigated yields because that's how the bank wrote the note. A councilwoman says her town trucks water on bad weeks. They shake hands, promise to study it, and drive home past the same sagging gauges. Some families take the deal. A brittle quarter gets a permanent buyout. The home place goes Dryland. They use the payout to put up bins, buy a no-till drill, and pick up a side business washing panels at a solar farm. Year 1 hurts. Year 3, the rotation steadies, fewer truckloads, fewer panic nights, a lender who stops circling. Others run the pump until it coughs, then sell at a deeper discount. Both choices cost identity. A pivot was a scoreboard. Silence feels like leaving the league you trained for. Kids run their own math. A daughter who can weld, code, and run a planter maps 3 futures on a yellow pad, stay and pair Dryland with shifts at the substation, leave for a water-secure county where a processor is hiring, enlist and wire money home while the farm retools. Her grandparents remember cousins riding west during the 193s. Today the arrows point north to river towns and east to the lakes, where taps don't tremble in August. Heat writes another column. Pen riders track temperature-humidity index bands like storm warnings, stage bales for shade, add troughs, because a 1,000-pound steer can need 20 gallons in a narrow afternoon window. Miss it and performance drops, or animals die. A custom cutter flips to nights, trading sleep for safety and catching rest in pickups under humming vents. A grandmother stitches shade cloth over a yard where sprinklers once danced. The body learns what the well already knew. Not every arc bends down. A county organizes a compact. Farmers trim 20% with meters and monthly reports. The city buys rights in its capture zone. The school keeps both bands by consolidating smartly instead of bleeding quietly. A co-op launches verified water budgets. A feedlot pays a small premium for grain grown under caps and posts it without greenwash. The wells don't rise. People do. New pride takes root. Inches saved get a ribbon next to yield. The church pantry stocks local flour milled from Dryland wheat and sells small bottles of sunflower oil pressed by 320-somethings who came back. From above, fewer green circles, more patchwork, stubble, strips, windbreaks stitched back into lines. On the ground, the sound changes, fewer midnight motors, more porch conversations about storms that actually soaked. Lives reshape around water truth, not the wish. And in that honesty, towns find just enough story to keep a Friday night lit. Climate turns the screw. The aquifer was already falling. Then heat raised the floor. Hotter summers don't just wilt leaves, they spike vapor pressure deficits, so crops demand more water per day exactly when wells deliver less per hour. A June that once cost an inch now exacts 2. Schedules unravel. The plant opens its stomator and begs. The pump whines, the meter spins, the baseline slips another foot. Nights used to be recovery, not anymore. Warm evenings keep stomator open longer, so plants keep transpiring instead of resting. Wells that caught up after sunset now fall behind, and the deficit rolls forward day after day. By August, bowls clear less, motors run hotter, and cavitation shows up earlier in the week. You end the season with bearings tired, bowls rougher, and a static level that doesn't rebound by winter. Climate didn't start depletion, it removed the pause button. Rain changed shape too. Precipitation arrives like a punchline, weeks of quiet, then a deluge that sprints off crusted surfaces. Without residue and structure, little soaks past the root zone. Even where fields hold cover, intensity often beats infiltration. In the south, winter once dripped moisture back into the profile. Now warm spells evaporate those small deposits between storms. The aquifer only counts what reaches the saturated zone. Lately, the ledger shows noise, not deposits. Heat isn't polite to cattle either. Yard managers watch temperature-humidity index bands like storm warnings. Above danger thresholds, a 1,000-pound steer can want 20 gallons in a narrow afternoon window. Miss that surge because pressure slipped, and performance drops or animals die. Shade goes up, misters hum, storage tanks become life support. Every fix draws from the same stressed source. Water shifts from feed to survival, and margins thin with the thermometer. Workers carry the heat in their bodies. Custom cutters flip to nights, trading sleep for safety. Pen riders stage bales early and walk lines under a white sky that feels like a furnace door. Plant crews stagger deliveries to dodge 3 o'clock choke points. Insurance adjusters add heat event protocols beside wind and hail. Adaptation becomes a shift schedule, not a slogan. A micro-story out of Finney County keeps circulating. A wheat sorghum rotation under heavy residue looked resilient, then May delivered 6 straight days over 100 with wind. The sorghum rolled its leaves tight, the wheat grain shrank. The producer limped a life-saving inch through a tired pivot at boot stage. It worked enough to meet the note. By August, the well's static had dropped 5 feet and never rebounded to last year's mark. Next spring started farther down. Municipal systems feel the same squeeze. Lawns pull peak day surges, mains pop under heat, cooling centers open. Towns drill deeper, bond for storage, and chase the same contractors as feed yards. Pressure zones get throttled to keep taps alive. Each event passes. The baseline it leaves behind is lower. Crop insurance tallies the volatility in dollars. After clusters of heat domes, revenue policies write bigger checks. Reinsurance prices that risk. Premiums nudge up. Subsidies backstop the difference. On paper, stability holds. In the ground, another stair step down. A program designed to cushion families and lenders can also harden expectations that yesterday's crop belongs on tomorrow's inches. Tech still helps within limits. Shorter season hybrids dodge some August stress. They still need inches earlier. Drop nozzles shave evaporation, they can't conjure water. Soil work banks precious days, it can't refill fossil stores. Climate turns every saved inch into gold while inflating the price of every mistake. Miss a planting window, skip a residue pass, delay a set by 24 hours in a dome week. Each error hits harder because heat amplifies the penalty. Markets notice. Basis moves on 7-day VPD outlooks. Credit terms reference metered cuts and storage capacity. Procurement contracts add heat clauses tied to staging and redundancy. The aquifer used to be a hidden asset nobody depreciated. The climate bill forced depreciation onto spreadsheets, then into bids. Psychology shifts with the weather. Producers stop treating heat as an outlier and start planning for spikes. Schedules harden around dawn and dark. Towns rehearse summer playbooks the way they used to rehearse harvest logistics: shade, storage, staggered use, backup pumps tested by June. The new rhythm is fewer miracles, more margins. That rhythm demands humility with inches and discipline with pride. And here's the tightest screw. Heat raises crop demand precisely when falling heads raise pumping costs. Every extra foot of lift takes more power. Every added degree takes more water. Every delay risks a yield hit you can't insure away forever. The physics align against habit. That's why managed descent isn't just policy, it's adaptation strategy. In a hotter world, the only reliable reserve is the inch you didn't pump yesterday. The balance sheet reckoning. It starts with an appraisal that lands like bad weather. Irrigated comps slip when the test hole wheezes. Acres once booked at 240 bushel potential get revalued at dryland yields. A banker in Garden City pencils a lower collateral number and a covenant trips quietly. Renewals drag. Terms return with higher rates, tighter reporting, and a nudge towards selling a quarter that feels like losing a rib. It doesn't stop at one desk. Community banks syndicated notes. Regionals hold equipment paper. County bonds priced on irrigated valuations meet ratings calls. Insurance carriers raise crop premiums after heat pulses. Reinsurance pushes the bill downstream. Everyone adds a new line, water risk, and stops pretending an aquifer asset doesn't depreciate. A micro-story says it clean. A family brings cookies to the bank, like always. The officer is kind and firm. New appraisal, new loan-to-value, meters on every well, monthly pulls. They sign, step outside, and decide which bin project dies. Procurement reads the turn fastest. Grain handlers lock river-tide supply. Cold storage migrates to basins with steady intakes. Packers hedge line time north and east. Railroads price lanes that dodge brittle counties. Logistics firms sell resilience. Towns sell pivots for parts. Politics arrives last. Food inflation turns hearings into maps. Lawmakers float insurance reforms that scale subsidies to basin stress, flex ethanol volumes where saturated thickness is thin, and fund permanent retirements in crimson zones. Lobbyists stall. The aquifer doesn't. When the music slows, leverage belongs to whoever can guarantee a gallon or prove they don't need it. Balance sheets learn late that past rain doesn't back today's loans. The fork in the road, two futures. By now the choice isn't theoretical. It's a vote at a water board, a clause in an insurance contract, a line in a county budget. Managed descent or crash course, both cost, both hurt, and both write different endings for towns trying to keep a Friday night lit. Managed descent starts with a law that tells the truth. Groundwater districts adopt binding caps tied to a hydrologic budget, what the aquifer can actually spare. Not desired futures, not guidelines, ceilings with teeth. Universal meters on every high-capacity well. Monthly reporting, public dashboards, and audits that don't wait a year. Year 1 trims a modest 5 to 8% to build muscle memory. Year 3 tightens again, guided by gauges everyone can see. Inside township lines, neighbors write compacts. The deepest, cleanest wells cover life-saving passes at Tassel or Boot, while brittle corners rest under prairie strips. The district maps cones of depression like weather, and the target isn't recovery, it's a glide path that families can actually fly. The city joins on purpose. It bonds for storage, fixes leaks, and buys rights in its capture zone with state and federal help. That puts a fence around taps and slows the cone marching toward municipal intakes. A feedlot signs a verified water budget program with grain buyers. paying a small premium for corn, sorghum, or wheat produced under caps, and posts those numbers next to average daily gains. The school plans for steady enrollment instead of chasing growth, consolidates smartly, and keeps both bands. A co-op runs workshops on wheat, sorghum, fallow rotations, negotiates forward contracts that give bankers something bankable besides hope, and cuts dividends in years when the basin misses its target. It still hurts. Land values step down and then stabilize. Some families sell a quarter and keep the home place. The pivot auction still happens, less often, and the buyer is usually a neighbor consolidating limited inches on the best soils. Credit shifts, rates ease for verified cuts, lenders nudge investment toward bins, drills, shade, and storage instead of horsepower. Young people map Farm Plus futures, hauling 2 days a week, maintaining solar arrays, fabricating windbreaks, coding telemetry, anchored by Dryland rotations that can live under caps. Pride changes shape. County fairs hand out ribbons for inches saved alongside top yield. Co-ops share dividends when the basin hits its budget. From above, you see fewer green circles and more patchwork, stubble that holds, strips that catch snow, windbreaks stitched back in. On the ground, you hear fewer midnight motors and more porch conversations about a storm that actually soaked. Policy lines up with physics. Crop insurance redesigns its incentives. Premium subsidies step down on thirsty crops in stressed districts and step up for rotations that sip. Ethanol eligibility flexes with basin health. Volumes ratchet down where saturated thickness slips below thresholds and shift to plants tied to rivers. Utilities reward absolute reductions, not just time shifting. Rebates for decommissioned horsepower, credits for verified cuts during heat domes, co-funded storage to avoid panic pumping at 3 in the afternoon. Permanent buyouts and multi-year leases idle brittle quarters and protect municipal capture zones at valuations that let families land, not fall. A multi-state council publishes monthly dashboards, a living ledger of pumping, thickness, and compliance, so politics can't hide behind last year's numbers. Nebraska's integrated surface groundwater model holds where rivers feed the bank. Kansas scales its local enhanced management discipline with teeth. Texas districts earn federal dollars by aligning desired future conditions with inches, not wishes. Managed descent doesn't lift the baseline, it flattens the slope. The Kansas tape still reads down, but the line softens. Municipal wells stop sprinting deeper. Emergency trucks don't get called in July because a main popped at the wrong hour. Auctions become controlled retreats instead of last rites. A teacher doesn't have to pack her classroom twice in 3 years. A feedlot keeps pens full with shade, storage, and contracts that accept sorghum in hot weeks. Export partners don't stop hedging, but they stop asking for assurance letters you can't sign. The county keeps enough story to keep kids in the bleachers. The crash course is faster and meaner. Local politics punt cuts another season. Ethanol volumes remain sacred. Insurance keeps cushioning high water choices in redline zones. Then a hot summer lands on brittle fields and the staircase drops again. Cones of depression merge across county lines. A handful of deep wells last just long enough to trick neighbors into betting one more year. Auctions multiply from controlled retreat to last resort. Bankers stop whispering and start calling notes. A packing plant idles a shift, then closes when yards can't keep pens full without trucking cattle from 3 states away. The school misses its enrollment floor and consolidates on a timeline nobody chose. The diner's lights go out on Tuesdays and never come back on. Feedlots migrate in clusters, some north toward rivers and lakes, some east to barge-fed grain. Yards that stay add shade, misters, and storage and still lose the leverage they once had. Ethanol plants widen draw radii until freight breaks the math, then seed volume to river-adjacent facilities. The local loop stretches until local becomes nostalgia. A city manager orders emergency water trucks twice in 1 July after a main breaks and pressure craters. The weekly paper, if it still prints, runs a front page that reads like an exit. Auction notices, a plant closure, a school board vote. State leaders finally step in, not because they plan to, but because the calls got too loud. Federal dollars arrive with strings, meter, cut, report, or move to the back of the line. The bill is bigger now, buyouts at fire sale valuations, retraining for displaced workers, emergency drilling for towns, bailouts for districts that waited too long. Export rivals fill the slack while hearings begin. Reliable supplier loses letters one season at a time. Basis moves on depletion news the way it moves on river stages. Credit terms reference meters you don't have. Procurement contracts add heat clauses you can't meet. The aquifer doesn't argue, it just stops. Both futures end with a leaner high plains. Under managed descent, communities get to pick what to save. TAPS, a core of irrigated acres where physics and profit still meet, a school with enough programs to hold kids, and a modest industrial base that doesn't bet on endless pumping. They let go of a few circles, a myth about the same yields forever, and the old promise that more is always the goal. Under the crash, they don't get to pick. The aquifer decides when the pump coughs, everything else tumbles. So the fork isn't 10 years out. It's embedded in the next budget, the next utility rate sheet, the next farm planner banker signs. It's in whether a district publishes monthly pools or annual stories, whether a co-op pays a dividend for inches saved, whether an ethanol plant earns its mandate in a basin that's still got a pulse. The choice is simple and brutal: glide now with pride and policy, or fall later with sirens and auctions. One path writes itself in fewer midnight motors and steadier soil. The other writes itself in empty gyms and flatbeds, hauling pivots to counties that still drink. The lie that abundance was forever led us here. The truth that fewer inches can still fund a life if we choose it can write a different ending. The throttle has been open by default for 80 years. Managed descent is everyone reaching for the brake while there's still enough road to steer. We built a food empire on borrowed water, and the bill is due. Pay now with policy and pride, or pay later with empty wells and closed towns. If you want the unfiltered stories and the choices that still matter, subscribe and watch our companion deep dive on America's next hidden choke point. Share this with someone who thinks tech outruns physics, then hit play on the next chapter.